Thank you so much. In respect to transparency, I have to say, I would not be standing here if Nina was not my partner. I would never be an architect. I have to tell you the truth. And I'll tell you the anecdote. You know, when I won the first competition I ever entered, which was the Jewish Museum in Berlin, I turned to Nina and said, you know, are we going to stay here to try to build this project, which seemed really very unlikely at that point? And she said to me, in her inimitable way, how can I, you know, be here with you? I've never in my life even been in an architect's office. And I said, the same applies to me. I've never been, well, in honesty, maybe for 2 days, I was in an architect's office. So Nina should really be up here because we heard our colleagues, fascinating how this sort of memory idea of who you are and why you're doing what you're doing is here. I have no idea why I became an architect. It's just by accident, really, accident of history. And the truth is that we don't choose where we were born. You know, we don't choose our parents. We don't choose the place in which we grow up. It just happens to us. And I just recently read somebody in India sued their parents for being born. You know, he said, I never wanted to be born. You ruined my life. Okay, two dangers constantly threaten the world: order and disorder. That's really kind of what I feel about where I am, where we all are. I was born in Łódź, industrial city in Poland, the Manchester of Poland. I was born in a, now that might be qualification for being an architect. I was born in a homeless shelter. My parents were both Holocaust survivors who survived first under the Nazis, then in the Soviet gulags. Came back to Poland. I was born, and they came back from far away in Russia. And I was born in this really amazing city, which itself is a product of an amazing history, formed by Polish people, by Germans, by Russians, and by Jews. Really kind of a miracle of understanding and also the collapse of that understanding. It's a photograph of my city, of the cemetery. You know, Poland, Europe is a bloodland. Really, think about it. In my country, in Poland, 3 million Jews vanished. I mean, it's not easy to say 3 million Jews vanished. They were murdered. The soil is just, look in Europe, World War II, we forget it sometimes. 50 million people were murdered as a result of Hitler's annihilation of the Jews. So that's kind of my experience. That's where I come from. I didn't have any uncles and aunts and cousins. I was part of a generation that grew up in that ghost-like space of what it means to have, well, I was not really a survivor, my parents were, but what it means to have been born just after those events. So that's where I was born. That's where I was there recently. It's a tenement. You know, it's kind of a city of slums. It's collapsed after within communist dictatorship. It was a city of grayness. Polish culture is amazing. Polish people are amazing. Polish history is amazing. Polish desire to be free is amazing. But if you really look at the history, which I lived, really post-war history, till I was about 11 years old, I lived in that kind of environment of sadness, of grayness, of conformity, of dictatorship. That's really, yeah, that's my experience as a kid in school. By the way, also of great anti-Semitism. There was another ingredient which was part of the dictatorship and part of ruling power's idea of how to rule the world yesterday and maybe today and tomorrow as well. One of the things that truly inspired me, you know, living in this grayness, and my parents once took me to Libeskind. It's a salt mine in Poland. It was already a great place in the 18th century. You know, Goethe, Schiller, all the great romantic poets, artists went there. It's underground. It's a city of salt. You know, it's white city with black lakes. It's an amazing city. It's all out of salt. You know, the chandeliers, everything you see is carved out. The stairs. It's, you know, I recommend you go there because it's kind of in the darkness. There is a light. In the darkness, which is hidden away from the everyday world, in the underground, where workers carved and tried to live by taking the salt out, they created really a spiritual space. And that space really remained with me for all these days because, you know, it's not just the light in the darkness, but also the work that they had to perform to create something that had a value beyond the material value of the salt itself. So it's a chapel you're seeing here. It's kind of an amazing place. That is part of my mind. My mind is a piece of salt, absolutely, with some pieces carved away by others. Well, we're not in Poland anymore. I was lucky when they allowed Jews to leave Poland. They also confiscated our passports. We were exiled. We went to Israel. That's the only place we could go. But what a light. This is the first time I saw something other than the grayness. I saw, the country was 8 years old at that time. A city of Bauhaus buildings, a city of light, a city where Jews were not only the doctors and lawyers, but were the garbage collectors, the prostitutes, the policemen. An amazing experience for a young person to see this and to experience kind of how the world rapidly can be transformed just by moving yourself or being moved by political events, in the Cold War in this case, through yourself and through your spirit. When I was in Israel, all my life I was a musician, by the way. I was doomed, or maybe not doomed. That was the way I became an architect. I was a virtuoso on the accordion. Now, people will laugh when I said accordion because it's associated usually with gypsies and beggars and, stuff like that, like light music. Rightfully so, because, you carry the whole orchestra by yourself. You have to inflate it with air. It's a heavy instrument. When I came to Israel, and by the way, when I left Poland, Nina just reminded me, the only person who came to say goodbye to us at the railway station in Łódź, taking us all the way to Venice and then by boat to Haifa, was my music teacher, Mr. Stajkowski. I'll never forget that. So I went to Israel. Somebody said, Mr. Libeskind, you should compete. You play very beautifully. Compete on this strange instrument in the America-Israel Prize for Music, which I did. It was very strange because everybody there, hundreds of young geniuses, from young age to about 18, on violin, piano, voice, tuba, all sorts of, voice. I competed on the accordion. The three judges, you might not know their names, Zino Francescatti, Mrs. Kusevitsky, the great patron of music. Her husband founded the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Isaac Stern, the head of the jury, looked aghast when I walked in with, actually, I didn't carry the accordion, it was too heavy for me. My father carried it in a suitcase. It's an instrument which is in a suitcase. By the way, that's why I played it, because my parents were too afraid to bring the piano through the courtyard. They were too fearful of our neighbors. So they said, okay, we've got a piano inside of the suitcase. Wow, half of it looked like a piano. The other was a strange thing. Anyway, when I played only classical music, I did play Bach, and I played, Toccata in D minor, and great Baroque piece of music. I won the competition. Look, on the right is young Itzhak Perlman, probably the greatest violinist alive today. There were not too many winners, as you can see. But how strange that as a result of winning that competition, Isaac Stern, probably you know his name, came over to me, put his arm around me and said, you've already exhausted everything you can do on this instrument. You have to play the piano. Now, little did he know that it's very difficult to go from the vertical keyboard to a horizontal. Probably that's why I became an architect, because architecture is not horizontal, it's always vertical. So yes, so the truth is that I consider music really my true base of what I do. This is, Bach. I used to transcribe Bach's music for my own instrument. And music really is the ground of what I do. Where did I grow up? After I came, my second immigration to America, my father had his only surviving sister who survived Auschwitz out of, a family of 10. Normal story. My father was determined to come to New York. My parents were factory workers. My mother worked in the garment industry. She always had a sewing machine that gave her freedom. My father worked, in various jobs in factories, printing works and so on. And I grew up, when I came to New York, in the first public housing project built in the United States. It no longer exists. It's in the Bronx. It was built in 1927, 28. There was even a movie in the 30s, American movie made about the garment jungle. The exploited, mostly women workers. They're exploited today, other ethnicities, Chinese, African Americans, so on. But at that time, it was mostly Jews, Italians, and Irish in these factories. And we're lucky to be living in this housing project number 1 in the Bronx. It now is gone. There are 2 big towers standing. But it taught me a lot about, you know, what it is to live with people, not in a tenement, but in some sort of social space, sitting on the steps. You know, the gossip, the immigrants. It was a world of immigrants, totally, from different walks of life destroyed in Europe. Here in the Bronx, when I look back at it, it's not so bad. You know, it didn't have air conditioning. It had no elevators, and yet the life was full of meaning because people shared something beyond their material possession. Nobody had the television. Nobody. That was something that I kept in my mind, actually. And by the way, I'm doing now a lot of affordable housing. And I just won a competition in Bedford-Stuyvesant and Detroit and other places because that's the future of architecture. Where did I go to school? Look at this. This is the school I went to. I went to a school that tried to catch up with the Russians in space technology during the height of the Cold War. 1965-70. I was put into the Bronx High School of Science because of my supposed abilities in mathematics and science, which I really hated. But that was the school. Look, in the school is Galileo and Newton and Einstein. You know, it's a church. And by the way, Bronx High School of Science produced more Nobel Prize winners than France. Just think about it. This high school in the Bronx produced more Nobel Prize winners than all of France. So yeah, I was doomed to try to, you know, survive in these courses of atomic physics. Most of the people I went to school went straight from high school to PhDs in MIT and Harvard. You know, they did experiments, you know, really serious experiments. They were geniuses. When I was given the project what to do, you know, I should have known there was a sign from God. I designed a perfect atomic shelter, you know, with a big model. My father helped me with the figures. We had the cans of Campbell's soup stacked for the next few months of survival. Yeah, Cold War. Let's not think it's in the past. There is a cooling of the air as we speak. And what did I do in school? You know, those are my teachers. John Haydock at Cooper Union, Peter Eisenman, Richard Meyer, all the great. You know, what were they doing? They were obsessed with Dutch architecture. How amazing. This is the diamond house of John Haydock. But, you know, it's based on Mondrian. Everything was really formalistic, right angles, counts, perfect grids, perfect. The beauty of neoplastic mind, the plastic mathematics of Schoenfeld, and so on. That was really my background. So what did I do? I had to reject it all. You know, and how did I reject it? I didn't reject it ideologically. You know, not by just saying, I don't like the right angle. But I tell you the small anecdote. I grew up in a small apartment, 2 rooms, with my mother, father, and sister in the Bronx, in that housing project. We had one table. It was a Formica table, very ugly, ungainly Formica table, which, you know, straight and then had big round corners. And of course, after dinner, I had to clean up the table, wash the dishes, you know, the normal things, and put my paper in T-square and start to do my assignments from, you know, the great Bauhaus teachers that I had. Now, you can imagine that with a T-square, it's very difficult to know at what point you're no longer on the perfect edge of the table, but you're beginning to be on the slight curve. Maybe it's 1 degree. It's not that easy to see. Then I suddenly realized, you know, instead of just fighting against it, I realized that the world was much more interesting than staying on the, you know, right side of the table. You could go around the curve and produce 359 other angles. That gave me a sense of a new freedom. You know, I know we're in Holland, and we're still in the land of the right angle. But, look, things are changing. We can see it here. So, for many years, I was a teacher. You know, I always say I lived my life in reverse. You know, most people start with us, you know, young architects. They apprentice themselves. They work their way up. They get commissions. I had nothing. My first building was not built till I was in my 50s, which was the Jewish Museum. I never built even a small, you know, a cottage or a garage addition because I just didn't believe in kind of architecture that way. I was a professor. I was the head of, you know, School of Architecture at Cranbrook Academy of Art. By the way, I lived in the Eames house, where Eames was also a professor teaching design. So I had very illustrious, and I was, you know, at Harvard, illustrious schools. If you could see the names, I imported all the thinkers that I thought were amazing. You know, Sverre Fan from Norway and Aldo Rossi from Italy. And I mean, everybody who I could think of to try to, you know, revive the program in this illustrious institution. By the way, I had only 1-year contract because they said they were going to close the school. school was failing. You know, it's hard to maintain a school. So anyway, it was maintained. And what did I do there? Now, I was thinking a lot about how we get trapped in systems of illusion. You know, look at Descartes, the great inventor of the right angle, right? I mean, he's the one who doubted that what his teachers told him was right. He thought, let's reduce everything to zero, to an axial system of plus, minus. Let's coordinate everything. Let's start building up a completely new world, starting from this Cartesian notion of true, transparent reason that can be communicated easily. Amazing. You know, if Descartes was to come today, he would be amazed how much he succeeded with the binary logic, with the DNA, with everything that we have. You know, he created that world. There was not such a world before him. Look at Brunelleschi. To invent an idea that what is far is invisible and what is close is, you know, important. So the farthest thing from you is the vanishing point. God does not exist, it's just a point. But the chair is very close to us. You know, the body next to us is the most important thing. Think about it, Chinese have the exact opposite idea. To the Chinese landscape, Chinese perspective, so to speak, what is farthest away is biggest. What is closest to you is completely irrelevant. Yeah, well, it's culture. And of course, then we have somebody like Eric Mendelssohn, one of these great modernists, who said, you know, you don't need to do anything. Just take a pencil, listen to, Mendelssohn or Bach or Beethoven for 5 seconds, and just use the pencil, and perfectly, shop in the department store. You don't need anything more, just the kind of movement of your hand. Another genius. Okay, so that's really what I was doing. What was I doing with my time? You know, I wasn't drawing buildings because I didn't have clients. I didn't have any social situation. I didn't have a budget. What was I going to draw? Some castles or imaginary housing projects? No. So I drew this. I put all my sort of, my idea of the world into these, well, very, very constructed drawings. They were partly Cartesian, partly Mendelssohnian, definitely Brunelleschian. So yeah, I put all my thought into this series of micromegas, and then I went on to the chamber works, which were based on music, and sort of collapsed the world of all the ideas into just the lines and the ruling pen on a piece of paper. And by the way, that was my treatise for architect, because how was going to do architecture? I didn't work in an architect's office. I tried for 1 or 2 days, and I said, that's not for me. It's too boring, too dull. It's going to kill me. So I quit. But I thought this treatise could, if I write a treatise like, Guarini or, Borromini, I could get a path. I could construct a path. And believe it or not, all my buildings, all my city plans, everything that I've ever done comes from these drawings that I did, 1983, 84, so a long time ago. But yeah, they were full of the idea of the future. And of course, that's the miracle of the wonder, that you can not just predict the future, you can construct the future in some enigmatic way. Then, of course, I was involved in creating, Vitruvius said, you can't just do drawings, you got to do machines. So I did my own, memory machine, my writing machine, my reading machine, sort of to try to experience the medieval, the Renaissance, the Baroque, the modern, strange machines because they're emblematic, but it was a way to solve an issue that bothered me, that it's not enough to just draw. You have to take a machine, some memory machine, a reading machine, a writing machine, to create something beyond just that two-dimensional object. So I have to say, I use these machines as well. They were very useful to me. I use them. They're large, but usable. Okay, I'm going to end here very, very briefly. This is the last discovery, 2018, of what is considered the oldest drawing in the world. It was discovered in South Africa, Cape Town, in a cave. It has this red, you can see the lines. There are a few quasi-parallel lines, and there is a kind of 2 or 3 curved lines. It's considered, they don't know what it is. They know it's a deliberate communication, that people understood the conceptual, metaphysical information stored in those lines. And that's, to me, fantastic, because it's a transmission to us from 100,000 years ago. By the way, 500,000 years ago, 500,000 years ago, they discovered a shell. Now, it's not a drawing. It's a scraped engraving on the shell, on an oyster shell, of a kind of a zigzag. And no one really knows what was intended. But for sure, there was the struggle to say something. And I think a lot about it. What is our environment telling us? What is our world telling us? What is the message we are sending to the future? Now, I saw the little girl from Sweden, you know, amazing, leading a march across the world. You know, no agendas, just a normal girl in high school. How is the world going to change? How is that message going to be recorded? How is architecture going to respond? Well, these are all questions that cannot really be easily answered because they don't only depend on human beings. Really, I'm not a religious, you know, some sort of religious, you know, person, but I know that it doesn't just depend on us. It depends on something else. You know, call it whatever you want. It depends on something else. And that's kind of what I'm really interested in. What is that something else? Since we don't believe in God, we don't believe in religion, we don't believe in any of those things anymore, what do we believe in? What is the guiding principle? I think they had this dilemma already when they started, when we started. And that's the question. Architecture is a question mark. It's the one field that has no definition. You know, architecture, you know, build something archaic, something ancient, something below the level of understanding. You know, it's the one field that is completely open-minded. Like medicine or law, it's completely invented. We invented it. It was invented by this kind of a genius. And, you know, I'm working on a project with Richard Leakey in Africa, in Kenya, of the Museum of the Human Origins in Nairobi. And I spoke to a lot of scientists from Oxford who are involved in the project. And I asked them, what do they think happened? You know, and they said to me, look at the stone, the earliest stone we have of the tool, which is just a regular stone. They said somebody, some genius in the ancient times, you know, a million years ago, before, you know, Homo erectus, before Homo sapien, somebody had to look at that stone and imagine that inside of it was a weapon. Look at the, you know, stone and be able to hit that stone with another stone to reveal a sharp corner. Wow, thank you.